Well, as you're being seated and the choir is making their way down, I'd like you to take your Bibles and find Isaiah chapter 6. We're going to be finishing that chapter here in just a few minutes. But first, I'd like to tell you a story on myself. It's always better if you tell a story on yourself than somebody else telling the story. That way you can control the story, right? So that's what I'm going to do. It's as factual as I can remember, I promise. Anyway, I know you probably find this hard to believe, but as a youngster, I probably wasn't the most obedient child that there was. Anyway, we'll just leave it at that. So anyway, lived in Kansas at the time, and got a lot of snow usually in the winter. And one of the things that Mama liked to do, she wasn't a baker. She didn't bake too much, didn't cook much. In fact, we spent a lot of Thanksgivings at the Holiday Inn, in the Plantation Embers, those kind of places. She just wasn't a cook. But anyway, one of the things she did like to do was make that snow cream or snow ice cream. And so we'd go out and we'd dig up a bunch of the white snow and bring it in. And, several, 2 or 3 ingredients would go in it. One of those was vanilla. And so she'd get down that bottle of vanilla and open it up. And as soon as she opened it up, you can smell the vanilla. And it just smelled so good. And I made some comment about how good that vanilla smelled. And I guess she knew me well. And she says, "Jimmy, don't drink the vanilla. It's not good for you." Now, you know where the story's going from here, don't you? So we make the snow cream. She goes off in another room. As quietly as I can, go over to the cupboard, climb up on the counter and open up the cupboard door and get that little brown bottle of vanilla, screw off that metal cap, and just take in the flavor. I just love that vanilla smell. And then drink some. Man, that stuff's nasty. Mama knew what she was talking about. It's hard to believe. And most of the time, parents do know. They know what's best for the kids. That's why they have the rules. Do this, don't do that. They know a little bit bigger picture than the child does. When it comes to God, of course, He knows it all, right? And He knows what's best. It's not just most of the time. He knows what's best for us. And so when He calls us to do something, when He calls us to a task, we need to be obedient in that. And so that's what we're going to be looking at today, is being obedient to God's call. We're going to be in Isaiah chapter 6, starting with the verse that we, after the verse that we finished with in the prayer time, but for the offertory prayer time. Just to give you a little background here, Isaiah, of course, a prophet to the southern kingdom of Judah, and the last part of the 8th century BC. So about the time he gets this call, about the time of Isaiah 6 is about 740 BC. So we're talking a long time ago that this happened, when this vision occurred. All right, so Bible's back here. Let's read that, Isaiah 6. We're going to read the rest of the chapter, starting in verse 8. Okay, so he's had the vision. He thought he's unclean. He got touched with the coal. And then, verse 8, "Then I heard the voice of the Lord saying, 'Whom shall I send, and who will go for us?' And I said, 'Here am I, send me.' He said, 'Go and tell this people, be ever hearing, but never understanding. Be ever seeing, but never perceiving. May the heart of this people, make the heart of this people calloused. Make their ears dull. Otherwise they might see with their eyes and hear with their ears and understand with their hearts and turn and be healed.' And then I said, 'For how long, Lord?'" Okay, I'm going to stop and interject a little stuff here. He's gotten this command to do what? To go and preach to people that ain't going to listen to him. It's kind of like the call of a Southern Baptist preacher, okay? Very similar to that. And he, like some of us ministers say, "Oh, for how long, Lord?" Right? That's not a glamorous call. It's to go preach to people it's not going to do any good. They're not going to listen to him. So he continues here, verse 11. "Then I said, 'For how long, O Lord?' And he answered, 'Until the cities lie ruined without inhabitant, until the houses are left deserted and the fields ruined and ravaged, until the Lord has sent everyone away and the land is utterly forsaken.'" Wow. We'll just stop right there. That's not a very glamorous call, is it? It's kind of depressing, actually, when you think about that. The call that Isaiah got. So God says, "Who's going to go for us? Who will go?" What was Isaiah's reply? Here I am. Here am I. Send me. This is the obedient reply of a child of God. Got a task for you? Here I am. Send me. That's not what we do a lot of the time, is it? A lot of the time, what do? God's okay. God, I want you to. God's talking to me in my heart, not out loud. He's talking to me, and I feel impressed that he wants me to do something. And I'm sitting in a crowd of 300 or 400 people, and it's easy to say, there's Brandon, send him. Not here am I, send me, but send this other guy. This other guy is more qualified than I am. And we tend to do that. But as I was reading the chapter 6, I was looking, I think there's a progression here in the call of Isaiah and what happened to him. It's kind of step by step. So let's look at that. The first thing he did, and this was in the previous reading we did earlier, he had an encounter with God. He encountered God more so than I ever have, that's for sure. Had this wonderful vision of God filling the temple and all this. And what did that lead to? That led to a recognition of his sinful self. Because when we encounter God and his holiness, and like the light of his holiness kind of shines in those places that we like to keep hidden, that nobody knows about, that light exposes those things and it brings it to the forefront. And so when we encounter God in a real, mighty, personal way, that encounter will reveal our own sinfulness and our own weakness. What did that lead to? That led to him being right with God. When he recognized that, confessed that, he was made right with God. It's after that point that God then calls him and said, there's the call. Who's going to go for us? And that's when Isaiah replies with willingness. Here I am, send me. Now, it's interesting to note, he doesn't know what the specifics are. God said, who's going to go? And Isaiah's at a point where he's encountered God and he's worshiped God and he's right with him. And God says, who's going to go? And he shoots up his hand. Here I am, send me. He doesn't even know what it is. Then what happens? Then the specifics come. Then he learns what the task is. And then further chapters after this, we see that Isaiah then obeys, as a prophet, he obeys God's call. So as I looked at this progression in Isaiah's encounter with God, it made me stop and think and analyze maybe why do more people not answer the call to service? It didn't have to be a call to missions or a call to full-time Christian ministry, but just a call to service. There's a lot of jobs that go undone, a lot of ministry opportunities that go undone, not just in our church, but I'm going to say in Baptist churches, in Christianity in general, because people are content in coming, and their service to God is limited to the hour they come and sit on a Sunday morning. They come, sit, stand up, sit down, stand up, sing a few songs, pass the plate, listen to the preacher, pretend like you're listening to the preacher, and go, that kind of thing. And I've checked it off. I've done my duty for the week. God may have something much more in mind for you. So I got to think, why do people not obey? Why do people not obey? So I was looking at this. We're going to leave this up on the screen for a while. And I thought, well, maybe they don't obey. And by the way, I'll tell you that your eyes aren't going funny, but our projector's going out. Okay, so that's why we have the funky green-yellow going on here. They may not obey because they're not willing. It takes a willing heart to be obedient. And why maybe aren't people willing? Well, maybe they're not right with God. It may be that people aren't right with God. That's why they're not willing. That's why they're not obedient. See, too many times we try to plug people into ministries and get them to do things, but maybe putting the cart before the horse. Why aren't they right with God? Well, maybe they've not repented of that sin. Why have they not done that? Maybe they've not had an encounter with God in a long time. I'm not saying they're not saved. I'm just saying it's been a long time since they've had a real encounter with God. Now, some people, when they sense that God's working in their life and He's calling them to do some kind of service, they will, and it's good to make sure, and pray about it and make sure this is exactly what needs to be done. But oftentimes we'll kind of use that as an excuse and we'll say, well, not now, but later. Like when the kids get graduated and they get out of the house, or I get the promotion, or whatever. They fill in the blank with not now, but later after such and such happens. Well, there's a word for that. A term, delayed obedience. And I think I mentioned this in a sermon within the last year or so, that delayed obedience has a shorter definition for it. It's called disobedience. Delayed obedience is disobedience. And parents, you know this. When, I'll just use a common example. You tell the kids, go clean your room. Okay. Unless you have specified otherwise, what you're saying is, right now, please go clean your room. So you go 2 or 3 hours later, the room is as messy, if not worse. Why haven't you cleaned your room? Well, I was going to do it. Okay, there's some delay. I was going to do it when I graduate, right? When my allowance increases, whatever. The same excuses that we might use, it doesn't fly with the parents, does it? No, because delayed obedience is disobedience. Now, as we've talked about, God was not calling Isaiah to an easy task. The call to preach was to people who would hear his words, wouldn't listen. In fact, would have hardened hearts. And I think, well, specifically, what does that mean for us? What does that mean for us if God calls us to something? What I can take away from that is that God's call on our lives isn't something necessarily glamorous. He may be calling us to something very difficult and have something in mind. And if you were in Sunday school, if you were in adult Sunday school today, this sermon kind of dovetails with that lesson, because as Joseph looked back on his life and the years he spent in slavery and being forgotten in prison and all this, he gets to the end where he could have just turned and had vengeance on his brothers. And he said, no, it was all for good. God had this in mind the whole time. So God sees that. He knows what he's doing when he calls us to a task. And it may not be a glamorous thing. It may not be you're here and he's moving you up the ladder, to more money, more prestige, or whatever. I know when we moved here about 7 years ago, we moved from Mountain Home, Arkansas, up in the north central part of the state. And if you've been there, you know why it's called Mountain Home. It's very homey, and there's a lot of mountains, right? It's a very beautiful part of the state. And I remember people at both that church and even some folks here say, why in the world would you want to leave Mountain Home and come to the Pine Bluff area? And the thing is, sometimes when God calls and God moves, it's not to a nicer, prettier geographic location. That's just part of it. In fact, Jesus himself said that following him was an act of self-denial. Take up your cross daily and follow me, he said. So I came up with this mathematical equation that there's one, delayed obedience equals disobedience. The other one is obedience to God is greater than secular success. At first I was just going to put success, but actually when you're obedient to God, that is success. But a secular success, the more money, prestige, glamour, fame, that kind of thing, just being obedient to God is it. That's where it is. It's greater than any secular success that could come your way. And sometimes people struggle with being obedient to God's call in their life, whether that's to missions, to ministry, to teaching, telling people about Jesus, just living like Christ would have you live. Not necessarily, it doesn't have to be go and share a plan of salvation, just acting like Christ. The call that we have on our life, sometimes it's a call to salvation. And sometimes people struggle with what to do and the delayed obedience and all that. So I've asked Ben Lunsford. He went on the Columbia mission trip with us back in September. I've asked him to come and share a little bit about how he came to trust God more and what it means to be obedient to him.
Good morning. When Jim asked me about speaking on obedience, I asked him if he had the right guy. I wasn't real sure. Before I really get started, I want to do this. I forgot to do this morning. I want to tell the church thank you for your support, prayers when we was in Columbia. The Sunday night before we left on Tuesday, I was with the men's huddle group, and that whole morning, if you were here, we came down. The first service prayed for us, second service prayed for us, and then even at the huddle that night, those guys prayed for us as well. And I'll be honest with you, I was a little uptight. My first time to ever, fly overseas. Going to, a country that I wasn't very familiar with. And so I was uptight. And after that, the prayers and just a sense of peace. Had no worries even when I got on the plane, started flying. I mean, I just knew everything. God was in control, so I knew that. So thank you for your prayers and support. When Jim asked me this, I wanted to do a little bit of research and have some sort of plan. 1 John chapter 2, verses 3 through 5. I'll read that real quick. And how can we be sure that we belong to him? By obeying his commandments. If someone says, I belong to God, but doesn't obey God's commandments, that person is a liar, does not live in the truth. This is the verse it's kind of what I'm going to tackle. But those who obey God's word really do love him. And that's the difference in me, I guess, in my life. And I hope you've seen a change. I've seen a change. A few years ago, I just really decided to make a commitment, make a change. I guess Jim and I are two great minds. Think alike, Jim. I have a formula as well, a mathematical equation is what you call it. Obedience equals love equals commitment. My deal was I wasn't the man of God that I should have been. I spoke about that Father's Day. I cried. I'm not going to do that this time. But it's just basically I decided that there's got to be a change. There needs to be a change. I wasn't the man that God had ordained me to be, as far as being a godly husband, godly father. So I decided to make a change, and it was just a commitment. And then once you make that commitment, it really boils down to just flat out love. And there's a difference in my life now and I'm growing each day. I'm not going to stop. I'm striving for that perfection, but it's just love. I mean, I don't know how else to say it. It's just a real deep, bona fide love that I have for God, and that's the difference in me. And it makes it easier, I guess, for to be obedient when you really love God. Our kids want to be obedient. They want to please us because they love us. The same thing with God. If you really, really have a desire to love him, you're going to desire to be obedient. Which basically that's benefited my relationship with not only with God, but with my beautiful bride. I would be remiss if I didn't say this. Married 15 years this week, so I need to bring that up. I love you, darling. And then and then also my relationship with my children and then other people. But that's the difference for me. When he brought up the whole deal with Isaiah, I kind of saw where he was going, because that's very similar to me. When the whole Columbia mission trip came up, if y'all don't know Andy, Jim said it, she's probably been on 10, and she's asked me every time to go, and every time I've had an excuse. So I started striving for a different being, a different life, and when this opportunity came up, I knew immediately, yes, this is what I need to do. So I guess after 15 years of strong prayers, I guess, from her, which I need, because I'm a little hard-headed, but that and just finally really committing, and the willingness part. I was willing, but if I'd have known exactly what I had to do, I may not have been as willing. But we got over that. And Andy said in her prayer in the first service that God calls. He doesn't always call the equipped. He equips the ones he calls. And if he can call me, and if you really just want to get technical, if you look at the disciples, a few of those were just bona fide rednecks. If he can utilize them, if he can utilize me, he can utilize you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ben. So actually, I didn't think about this first service, Ben, but it was an encounter with God. It kind of got you set straight. You repented and went on. It fits right into my scenario. Thank you for that. All right. Well, so it's important for us to realize that our obedience to God's call, it doesn't matter how out of character it seems, it doesn't matter how unsuccessful it appears, it impacts eternity. If we do what we're called to do, it will impact eternity. We can think back, let's think of Billy Graham. What would have happened if Billy Graham had not accepted God's call into ministry? And thousands and thousands and thousands of people's lives would be different. And you take that all the way back, let's say, to the Apostle Paul. If that experience on the road to Damascus, if that didn't change him like it did, how different Christianity would be. So I have an illustration. I've asked a couple of my young friends to come up here and help me. Come on, young friends. This is a illustration. I think Brandon used this 3 or 4 years ago in a sermon, and I'm not above stealing ideas. So take that. You take this. Go to the other side. There you go. Go over here. Go west, young man. There you go. Oh, there might be a knot in that. I don't know. This actually comes from Randy Alcorn's book, The Treasure Principle. It's a book that we studied as a church about 5 years ago or so. And in that book, he talks about the dot versus the line. And this is something in my Sunday school class, I probably harp on this at least once a quarter, once a unit, once every 6 weeks or so, just to cement it in. And we're just imagining here that this orange line is kind of like a number line. It's years. And it goes all the way back to before time began, and it goes this way for all eternity. And we just have a segment of that line right here. And in this segment of the line right here is the life of Jim Monroe. This is my life, this little dot right here. Now, that dot, let's see, I'm 53 years old, so that dot is at least 53 years big, at least that. And it could go up, who knows, 80, 90, 100, 110, who knows. But so here I am in the dot. Now, here's the thing that a lot of people, and you have to live in the dot, because that's where you are. You have to live in the dot. But what a lot of people do is they live for the dot. What do I mean by that? I mean, people live for the comfort, for the glamour, for the fame, whatever, that only the dot brings. But if you look, as this line just continues for eternity, what am I doing to live for the line? What am I doing to live for the line? When we obey God's call and follow Him, we may not see it, but we're living for the line, and it will impact eternity. All right, you can put that down. You don't have to roll it up. You can just put it down. All right, thank you, guys. My young friends. Well, we currently have 2 families in our church, and we prayed for them during our offering prayer time, who have obediently answered the call to missions. And their lives are impacting right now as well as into eternity. We mentioned Jason and Jennifer Hill, Wycliffe missionaries, soon will be traveling to New Guinea. Please come and hear them tonight at 5:30, right in here. They've got a lot of great stuff to share about their life, what's happened to bring them to this point, and then what they see God doing in their lives in the future. 5:30 tonight. Also, I'd mentioned this, table in the foyer after service. They've got some info out there. And then the Hobsons, Mark, Melissa, Olivia, and Claire. Their current assignment is in Bogota, Colombia. 8 million or so people in an area not known for safety, right? When you think of Bogota, Colombia, what do you think of? Let's be honest. What do you think of? You think of coffee? That's true, yeah. You know, Juan Valdez is a big guy there. What else do you think of besides coffee? You don't think of drugs and murder and gangs, that kind of stuff. When the Hobsons were getting ready to leave and they were headed, and he told me that they were going to Colombia, I said, man, you've been raised in the Pine Bluff area. This is for you, okay? So I don't know if he appreciated that analogy or not. But anyway, their main responsibility in Bogota is to partner, to get North American churches to partner with local Colombian churches there in Bogota and become partners and pray for each other, and for North American teams to come down and help strengthen and just do whatever they can to help. That's what we did back in September. We took 4 people, myself, Andy and Ben Lunsford, and then Donna Philman. And we went in, and our main objective was to encourage the pastor and the local church and to help them however we could. And so we did a couple of things. I'm going to show you a few pictures here and just kind of walk through these. What I'm going to show you is some things that you can experience if you ever go on a mission trip. You can experience some exotic foods, perhaps. That looks like cantaloupe slices, and they were about that big, but that's actually avocados, largest avocados I've ever seen. The other fruit, I don't know. It was some kind of funky thing, but it tasted good. Anyway, you can also make new friends. This is Magda. She's the pastor's wife. In the next screen, we see Pastor Umberto there with Mr. Ben. Get to meet great new friends. Not can communicate very well, but when you got the spirits, the commonality there, you can actually do a lot of communicating. Andy and Ben spent some time in a local school the kids were learning English, and they were learning. They were doing the EvangeCube and sharing the gospel story. And then I also did the salvation bracelets, and I was showing them how to do that. And then later that night, I went to that same school where the adults met to learn English. And so I was able to share my faith story, a testimony, if you will. And then the students there in the class, the adult students, were able to ask questions to a native speaker. So it's always good to learn from a native speaker. So even if I'm from Arkansas by way of Kansas, I guess I'm a native English speaker. I don't know. And another thing we did, we went into people's homes of folks in the church, and then the church people invited friends and neighbors to come, and we basically did the same thing, just shared our story, see if people had any questions, just to kind of get that door open, because Colombian people are very nice and friendly, but they're also kind of a closed people as well, and so it's not a bang on the door, do you know Jesus kind of thing. You just have to work with the culture. All right. Also, you can have a chance to see some flora that you've never seen before. There's some beautiful type flowers there, and up on the mountain that's right on the outside of Bogota, there's a cathedral, and up to the cathedral is the 12 Stations of the Cross, that our Catholic friends participate in, especially at Easter time. And so that's one of those there. That's just from that mountaintop looking down. That's just a segment of downtown Bogota. It's very modern. There we are. You get a chance to just bond with people, your teammates. You also get to experience traffic that you don't experience in Whitehall, Arkansas. It's very exciting. This is the room where they hold church every week, and you can see they have it decorated because in September, that week in September is their week of friendship and love, and it leads up to a day that's kind of like our Valentine's Day. And so that's why Ben and Andy spoke on marriage and Christ being the center of your marriage. And sometimes you just get to spy on people, and interrupt their private time, and so we can do that as well. Now, does that banner look familiar? We had a banner similar to that out in our foyer as we were the month or so leading up to our Colombia trip. Before we left, we created a banner similar to the one we have here. The one we have here is about Colombia and about that church. The banner we did for them is about Arkansas and Whitehall, and it's about our church, has some of our pictures on it. And then I got to preach as well that Sunday morning. And then you just get to meet, like I said, great people. Santiago, the guy in the middle there, just an excellent, wonderful young man, was one of our interpreters for the week. We will be making a couple of more trips in 2015. We've made a 3-year agreement, partnership agreement with this church in Bogota. We'll be taking a trip in the March-April time frame. Haven't nailed that date down yet. And then again in the September week as well. So as Pastor told me a month or so ago that he was going to be out on vacation this day, and I wanted to incorporate and bring to you and kind of tell you, because we haven't shared with you exactly our mission trip, but I didn't want to make it just a mission report time, so that's kind of incorporating all this here into the sermon. Well, I want you to remember that God is not a cosmic killjoy. He's not just sitting up there going, okay, I wonder what Jim Monroe doesn't like to do. I know he doesn't like to do that. Well, that's what I'm going to call him to do. Yeah, that'll teach him. I'll make him follow me. No, he's not like that. Now, a lot of times the call that we have on our lives will stretch us. Sometimes it'll take us outside of our comfort zone, and he may call us to do things that we're not comfortable with. But as Ben said, Andy prayed in the first service, he doesn't call the equipped, he equips the call. As we think about that timeline that the guys had up here, and that little segment, the dot and the line, I want to read you a story, and some of you have probably heard this. It's about a guy named Edward, a very humble guy that didn't think that he really could affect eternity, but he did. True story. Edward Kimball was a shoe salesman that worked alongside a guy named Dwight. Edward shared the gospel with Dwight, and Dwight accepted Christ. It was 1858, and Dwight's last name was Moody. We know Dwight Moody as D.L. Moody. He was one of the greatest evangelists in history. Years later, Moody was preaching, and a pastor named Frederick Meyer was so deeply stirred that as a result, he went into his own nationwide preaching ministry. On one occasion, when Meyer was preaching, a college student named J. Wilbur Chapman heard him and accepted Christ. He went out and began to share the gospel, and he employed a young baseball player named Billy Sunday. Billy Sunday ended up being the greatest evangelist of his generation. When Billy Sunday preached the gospel in Charlotte, North Carolina, it was such a great meeting that he was invited back. But when he couldn't be there, Sunday recommended a preacher named Mordecai Ham. Ham went to Charlotte and preached, but not too many people responded to his invitation to accept Christ. But on one of the last nights, a tall, lanky boy who worked on a local dairy farm walked forward. Everyone knew him as Billy Frank, and we know him today as Billy Graham. That's right. So you go all the way back, spiritual heritage, if you will, kind of trace that back to the shoe salesman who is just faithful with his call to share Christ. So he didn't live just for the dot. What he did impacted the line. If you think about the millions probably of people that were impacted by that. So the question, the challenge today is, what is God calling you to do? Is it a call to salvation? Is it a call to missions, to ministry? Is it a call for church membership? As we think about ministry, there are a lot of things that go undone around our church and all throughout Baptist churches and Christian churches because people aren't stepping up. I know, just to slip this in, I've got 2 adult Sunday school classes that I really need teachers for. Got that going on. There's always, I know Amanda's always looking for Awana workers. There's always a need there. The question is, what is God calling you to do? Is it maybe just a call to get right with somebody about some discrepancies in your life? Remember, delayed obedience is what? Delayed obedience is what? It's painful to say it, but that's right. It is disobedience. So commit yourselves. I'm going to ask you to commit yourselves today to live in the dot, but live for the line. And then whatever else God is calling you to do. We're going to have a time of invitation here in a minute. But if you would stand with me, we're going to pray. And you respond today as God leads you.